Welcome back to the channel. If you watched part 1, get ready, because everything you thought you knew is about to change. And if you're new here, don't worry. The opening will quickly catch you up before we dive into the next chapter of this unforgettable story. A billionaire CEO publicly humiliated his poor maid after catching her holding his newborn twins, while his wealthy fiancée accused her of trying to steal them. Without listening to her side, he threw her out of his mansion, believing she was a dangerous liar. But the twins cried endlessly for the maid. Hidden clues began surfacing one after another, and a forgotten silver bracelet exposed the first crack in a shocking deception. Just when Ethan Carter realized he might have destroyed the only innocent person in his life, a mysterious phone call revealed that someone far more powerful had been controlling everything from the shadows. Who is the ruthless billionaire secretly watching Ethan and Grace? What truth has Grace sacrificed everything to protect? And when the mastermind finally steps into the light, will love survive? Or will everyone pay the price for secrets buried years ago? The grand ballroom of the Carter mansion was nearly empty. Only a handful of employees remained, quietly clearing away abandoned champagne glasses and folding expensive linen tablecloths after the disastrous charity gala. The laughter that had filled the mansion only an hour earlier had vanished, replaced by an unsettling silence. At the center of the ballroom stood Ethan Carter. One hand remained tightly wrapped around the small silver bracelet Mrs. Harper had placed in his palm. His knuckles had turned white. His breathing was uneven. For the first time in years, America's celebrated billionaire CEO looked like a man who had completely lost control. Across the room, Vanessa Brooks watched him carefully. Her emerald evening gown had already been replaced with a silk robe, yet the faint stain from the spilled wine still lingered on the discarded dress lying across a nearby chair. She had expected relief after Grace's humiliation. Instead, Ethan hadn't spoken a single affectionate word to her since the confrontation. That frightened her. Narrative memory drifted quietly into the past. Years before Ethan became one of the country's youngest self-made billionaires, he had built Carter Technologies inside a rented warehouse with only 6 employees, borrowed equipment, and an aging pickup truck. His late father had taught him one lesson above everything else: wealth can be rebuilt, but character cannot. That lesson shaped his business empire, yet in one painful evening he had violated the very principle his father had lived by. The contradiction had begun eating away at him long before he admitted it. Mrs. Harper quietly approached. "Sir?" Ethan slowly lifted his eyes. "You said this bracelet belonged to someone important." He nodded. "I thought it was lost forever." "Whose was it?" Before Ethan could answer, he found himself remembering another time. Nearly 12 years earlier, a young entrepreneur named Ethan Carter had been driving through a rural highway after a manufacturing meeting. His truck had broken down near sunset. Cell service was almost non-existent. He had walked for nearly 2 miles before reaching a modest farmhouse. A teenage girl answered the door. She couldn't have been older than 17. Without asking whether he was rich, without recognizing his name, she invited him inside. Her parents offered him dinner. Her younger brother insisted he take the only warm blanket in the house. The family barely had enough for themselves, yet they shared everything. Before leaving the next morning, Ethan had tried paying them. Michael Mitchell politely refused. "We don't help people for money." Ashamed, Ethan had quietly left behind 2 handcrafted silver bracelets as a thank you gift. One for Michael, one for his daughter, Grace. The memory ended. Mrs. Harper stared at him. "Grace," Ethan whispered. "I never connected the names." He closed his eyes. It was her family. The realization landed with crushing force. The bracelet hadn't accidentally reached the twins. Grace had possessed it for years, which meant she had never lied about her character. If anything, she had remained exactly the compassionate young woman he'd once admired. Across town, Grace sat alone inside her small motel room. The room was dimly lit by a single bedside lamp. She had not changed out of the plain navy dress she wore to the gala. Her cheek still burned from Vanessa's slap. She gently touched the swelling before looking toward the old backpack resting beside the bed. Inside remained the sealed hospital envelope. Narrative memory reached even further into the past. After Michael Mitchell's fatal crash, Grace had become both sister and guardian to Noah. Creditors circled the family. Bills piled higher than hope. She worked until her hands blistered, refusing to let Noah abandon school. Every sacrifice she made grew from the promise whispered beside her father's hospital bed: protect innocent people before protecting yourself. That promise explained why she endured humiliation instead of exposing secrets too early. It also foreshadowed that her silence was never weakness. It was discipline born from love. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Grace cautiously opened the motel door. No one stood outside. Only a small envelope rested on the welcome mat. She looked both directions before picking it up. No postage. No return address. Inside was a single typed sentence. He knows you still have your father's files. Grace's heart stopped. Her hands began shaking. Another line appeared beneath it. Run before he finds your brother. The note slipped from her fingers. For years she had believed no one knew about her father's final request. Now someone clearly did. At that same moment, high above the city, a black helicopter landed atop an enormous private estate hidden behind iron gates and dense pine forests. The mansion belonged to Victor Blackwood. His wealth exceeded Ethan's several times over. His investment empire stretched across continents. Politicians attended his private dinners. Corporate rivals who challenged him often vanished from public life through financial ruin rather than violence, leaving no obvious crime to investigate. Victor preferred destroying lives without leaving fingerprints. He entered a private study lined with antique books and original paintings worth millions. Waiting beside the fireplace was his chief of security. The gala unfolded exactly as predicted. Victor removed his gloves. And Grace. She still has the envelope. Victor smiled faintly. Good. What about Ethan Carter? Victor walked toward an enormous wall displaying maps, corporate acquisitions, and carefully organized photographs. Among them were Ethan, Grace, Vanessa, Noah, even Mrs. Harper. Every life had been quietly observed. He has begun asking questions, the security chief reported. Victor nodded. He was always intelligent. Should we eliminate the risk? Victor's expression hardened. No. Confused men are useful. He gently tapped Grace's photograph. She's the key. And until she leads us to Michael Mitchell's evidence, no one touches her. Elsewhere in the city, another man parked an aging pickup truck outside a modest office building. His name was Lucas Reed. At 32, he no longer carried the polished appearance of the federal investigator he once had been. His suit was inexpensive. His office was rented month to month. His reputation had been destroyed after refusing to falsify evidence in a politically sensitive financial crimes investigation. Most people believed he had become a failed private investigator. Only a handful knew the truth. He had lost his career protecting evidence that powerful people wanted buried. As he unlocked his office door, he noticed a thick envelope waiting beneath it. Inside lay only 3 items: a newspaper clipping about the Carter Gala, a photograph of Grace Mitchell leaving the mansion in tears, and a handwritten note. If you still believe the truth matters, find Grace Mitchell before Victor Blackwood does. Lucas slowly lowered the photograph. For the first time in years, a name he thought had disappeared forever had returned. Victor Blackwood, the man no investigator had ever managed to defeat. And somewhere in the sleeping city, a young woman carrying nothing more than an old backpack and an impossible promise had unknowingly become the center of a war between billionaires, buried secrets, and a truth powerful enough to destroy empires. The morning after the disastrous charity gala dawned bright and clear, but the Carter mansion felt darker than it ever had before. Sunlight poured through towering windows, illuminating polished marble floors and priceless paintings, yet no amount of light could lift the weight hanging over the estate. The staff moved quietly through the hallways. No one laughed. No one exchanged the usual morning greetings. The memory of Grace being escorted through the front doors, while the twins cried for her, had settled over the household like an invisible fog. Mrs. Evelyn Harper stood alone in the nursery. One of the twins had finally fallen asleep after hours of crying. The other stared toward the doorway, occasionally letting out soft whimpers as though still expecting Grace to return. Mrs. Harper gently brushed the baby's tiny hand. "You miss her too, don't you?" A tear escaped before she quickly wiped it away. She had served the Carter family for over 30 years. She had watched Ethan grow from an ambitious young businessman into one of America's most respected billionaire CEOs. She had witnessed victories, losses, and heartbreak. Yet she had never seen him make a mistake that haunted him as deeply as this one. Downstairs, Ethan hadn't slept. He remained inside his office, the silver bracelet resting on his desk. His untouched coffee had gone cold. His eyes were fixed on 2 objects: the bracelet and an old photograph he had pulled from a forgotten storage box shortly before sunrise. It showed a younger Ethan standing outside a modest farmhouse beside a smiling family. Michael Mitchell, his wife, a teenage Grace, a little boy who could only have been Noah. The photograph had been taken 12 years earlier. Ethan slowly traced Grace's smiling face with his thumb. "So it really was you." His voice barely rose above a whisper. The memory became clearer. His truck had broken down during one of the hardest years of his life. His company had been close to bankruptcy. Investors were abandoning him. Banks had rejected another loan. He had wandered to the Mitchell farmhouse, believing he was simply asking for directions. Instead, strangers who barely had enough food for themselves had welcomed him like family. Michael had insisted Ethan stay for dinner. Grace had quietly repaired a tear in Ethan's jacket while everyone slept, refusing to let him leave wearing damaged clothes. Little Noah had proudly shown Ethan a handmade wooden airplane. He dreamed of becoming a real engineer one day. Before leaving, Ethan had secretly purchased the silver bracelets from a local craftsman. Not as payment, as gratitude. He had promised himself he would return one day to repay their kindness properly. Success arrived faster than expected. Business expanded. Travel consumed his life. The promise was forgotten. Until now. He closed his eyes. "I repaid kindness with humiliation." The words cut deeper than any business failure he had ever endured. A knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." Mrs. Harper entered quietly. "I thought you should know." The twins barely slept. Ethan nodded sadly. "I expected as much." They're still reaching toward the nursery door. Silence followed. Finally, Ethan looked at her. I'm going to find Grace. Mrs. Harper's eyes softened. I hoped you'd say that. But before I ask for forgiveness, I need to know everything. At the same time, across town, Grace began another shift at Linda's cafe. She greeted customers with the same quiet warmth she always had. Few people noticed the faint bruise still visible along her cheek. An elderly customer frowned. Did someone hurt you? Grace smiled gently. I bumped into something. The explanation satisfied no one. But no one pressed further. Linda watched from behind the counter. She had employed dozens of people over the years. She recognized hidden pain when she saw it. During a quiet moment, she approached Grace. You don't have to tell me what happened. Grace looked up. But whatever it is, don't carry it alone forever. Grace lowered her eyes. I've been carrying it for years. Linda placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Then maybe it's time someone helped. Grace offered a grateful smile. I appreciate that. She meant it. But she also knew some burdens couldn't simply be shared. Especially the one hidden inside the old backpack resting in the cafe office. Meanwhile, high above the city, Victor Blackwood stood before floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking his sprawling estate. His chief of security entered. Our people have confirmed the envelope remains with Grace. Victor nodded. And Ethan? He has begun investigating. Victor smiled. Exactly as expected. He walked toward a large chessboard carved from black marble. Several pieces were already arranged. He calmly moved one white knight forward. Most people think wars begin with the first attack. He looked toward the city. They're wrong. Wars begin years earlier, when someone believes they've escaped. His security chief remained silent. Victor finally revealed a small portion of the truth. 12 years ago, Michael Mitchell discovered financial records that could have destroyed everything I built. He copied them before we could recover them. He died. The security chief hesitated. We searched his home. We searched his office. We searched every bank. Victor's expression hardened. And we found nothing. He gently tapped Grace's photograph resting beside the chessboard. Because he trusted his daughter more than any vault. The room fell silent. For the first time, the audience understood why Grace had been watched for years. Not because she was wealthy. Not because she sought power. Because she had unknowingly inherited the one thing Victor Blackwood feared most. The truth. Across the city, Lucas Reed sat inside his modest office, studying the photograph anonymously delivered to him the previous night. Grace leaving the Carter mansion. Tears streaming down her face. Lucas leaned back thoughtfully. Years earlier, while working as an FBI financial crimes investigator, he had spent 18 months building a case against Victor Blackwood. Every witness disappeared. Every document vanished. Then someone inside the bureau altered key evidence. Lucas refused to sign the falsified report. Within weeks, he was accused of misconduct. His badge was gone. His career destroyed. But he had never stopped investigating. Victor Blackwood remained the one unfinished case of his life. Now that same name had returned. Lucas opened an old filing cabinet. Dust covered the folders inside. He pulled one marked simply, Blackwood. The file was far thicker than it should have been. Photographs, corporate records, maps, news clippings. One yellowed page caught his attention. A witness statement from 12 years earlier. Name: Michael Mitchell. Lucas slowly stood. So that's where you disappeared. He immediately grabbed his jacket. If Michael Mitchell had left anything behind, Grace would be in unimaginable danger. And if Victor had started moving openly, time was running out. Back at the Carter mansion, Ethan opened his safe and removed a leather notebook that had belonged to his late father. Between its pages rested an old business card. On the back, written in his father's handwriting, were 6 words. Find Michael Mitchell if anything happens. Ethan stared at the note in stunned silence. His father had been searching for Michael before his death. Why? What had Michael known? How were their lives connected? For years the notebook had remained untouched inside the safe. Now it felt less like a diary, and more like the first piece of a puzzle that someone had desperately tried to leave behind. Outside, storm clouds slowly gathered over the city. Not because fate demanded dramatic weather, but because a quiet war that had begun more than a decade earlier was finally awakening. And every step Ethan took toward the truth brought him one step closer to the most dangerous man he had ever failed to notice. 3 days passed, but for Ethan Carter they felt like 3 years. The silver bracelet never left his desk. Every morning he picked it up, turned it over in his hands, and remembered the smiling teenage girl who had quietly repaired his torn jacket without expecting anything in return. Every evening he asked himself the same question. How could I have forgotten her? His billion-dollar company continued operating with flawless precision. Executives signed contracts worth hundreds of millions. International partners called from London, Tokyo, and New York. The stock market celebrated Carter Technology's latest expansion. Yet its founder couldn't concentrate on a single meeting. His thoughts always returned to Grace. He replayed every moment from the gala. Vanessa's accusations, Grace's silence, the twins reaching toward Grace as security escorted her away. The more he remembered, the more one detail refused to make sense. Grace had defended herself, but she had never attacked Vanessa. She had only protected the baby from falling. That realization grew heavier with each passing hour. Across town, Grace tried to build a new routine. The cafe remained busy from sunrise until late afternoon. She poured coffee, cleared tables, and greeted customers with her usual gentle smile. Most never guessed she carried a burden far greater than unpaid bills or a broken heart. Only Linda noticed. Grace smiled with her lips, never with her eyes. Late one afternoon, Linda handed Grace a small paper bag. I packed you some dinner. You didn't have to. I know. Linda smiled warmly. But I wanted to. Grace accepted it gratefully. Small acts of kindness always reminded her of her father. Michael Mitchell had believed generosity was measured by sacrifice, not by wealth. That belief had shaped Grace long before tragedy entered her life. A quiet flashback settled into her thoughts. She was 14 years old, helping Michael repair the roof of their farmhouse. Instead of hiring expensive contractors, they worked together every weekend. As they hammered shingles into place, Michael had smiled. Never be ashamed of honest work. Grace laughed. I'm terrible with a hammer. You'll get better. What if I don't? Then you'll still know you tried. He had always answered fear with encouragement. Years later, after his death, those words became the reason Grace never stopped moving forward, no matter how difficult life became. The memory faded as she reached the small motel where she now lived. The hallway was unusually quiet. Too quiet. She instinctively slowed her pace. Her father had once taught her another lesson while walking through the woods behind their farmhouse. If everything suddenly becomes silent, pay attention. It usually means something changed. Grace unlocked her motel room. Nothing appeared disturbed. Still, she felt watched. She carefully removed the hospital envelope from beneath the mattress, where she hid it before leaving for work. The seal remained intact. She exhaled slowly. Whatever her father had entrusted to her, someone was searching for it. Miles away, Lucas Reed parked outside a county courthouse. Unlike Ethan, Lucas had no private jets or luxury chauffeurs. His pickup truck rattled every time he started the engine. His office furniture had come from second-hand stores. He measured wealth differently. Every unsolved case represented unfinished business. Inside the courthouse archives, he requested records connected to Michael Mitchell's fatal accident. The elderly clerk disappeared into the records room. Several minutes later, she returned carrying only a thin folder. Lucas frowned. "That's all." She nodded apologetically. "The rest disappeared years ago." Disappeared. There was a flood in the storage basement. Lucas opened the file. The pages looked too clean, almost untouched. His instincts immediately flared. The report contained only routine information. No witness statements. No accident photographs. No forensic analysis. Nothing explaining why an experienced driver had suddenly crashed on a straight highway. He quietly asked, "Who signed off on this investigation?" The clerk adjusted her glasses. "A detective named Harold Benson." Lucas recognized the name instantly. Benson had retired unexpectedly 6 months after Michael Mitchell's death. Lucas thanked the clerk and left. Outside, he stood beside his truck, staring at the empty courthouse steps. He had investigated corruption long enough to recognize erased history. Someone had cleaned the file. Someone powerful. At the same moment, high above the city, Victor Blackwood hosted a private luncheon for senators, judges, and corporate executives inside his mountain estate. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble. Vintage wines worth thousands of dollars lined the table. Victor appeared every bit the refined businessman. Only those closest to him understood that every conversation served a purpose. Every invitation created leverage. Every favor demanded repayment. After the guests departed, Victor walked into his private study. His chief of security entered. "Our surveillance team reports Ethan has reopened Michael Mitchell's trail." Victor poured himself a cup of tea. "Expected." "And Lucas Reed." Victor's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "So, the stubborn investigator finally came out of retirement. He visited the courthouse today." Victor smiled. "I admired Lucas once. He couldn't be bought." The security chief waited. Victor continued, "Which made him dangerous." He calmly placed the teacup on its saucer. "Increase surveillance. But leave him alone." "Why?" "Because determined men often uncover doors that lead us exactly where we want to go." The security chief nodded. Victor wasn't worried. He was planning. Back at Carter Technologies, Ethan summoned the company's longtime legal advisor, Charles Donovan. Charles had worked beside Ethan's father for nearly 3 decades. If anyone remembered Michael Mitchell, it would be him. Charles entered carrying several old storage boxes. "You asked for historical records." "I did." Ethan showed him the photograph from the farmhouse. "Do you recognize this man?" Charles froze. His face lost color. "Where did you get that?" "My father's notebook." Charles sat slowly. "I hoped this day would never come." Ethan leaned forward. "You know him?" Charles nodded. Michael Mitchell saved your father's company. Ethan stared. What? 12 years ago. Someone tried to force your father into signing a fraudulent acquisition agreement. Charles looked toward the office window as though reliving the memory. We didn't know it at the time, but Michael secretly warned your father. He risked everything. What happened afterward? Charles lowered his voice. A week later, Michael died. Silence filled the office. Charles finally met Ethan's eyes. Your father believed Michael's death wasn't an accident. He hired private investigators. They found nothing. Then your father became ill. The investigation stopped. Ethan slowly leaned back. Every answer uncovered another mystery. Every mystery carried one name he still couldn't place. Who had wanted Michael Mitchell dead? Before Charles could continue, Ethan's office phone rang. His assistant answered outside. Moments later, she entered hurriedly. Mr. Carter, a man is here to see you. I don't have appointments. He says you'll want to hear what he knows about Michael Mitchell. Ethan exchanged a glance with Charles. Who is he? The assistant hesitated. He says his name is Lucas Reed. Lucas Reed stood outside Ethan Carter's executive office with the calm patience of a man who had spent years waiting for people to believe him. He wore a dark suit that had clearly seen better days. The cuffs were slightly worn, and his leather briefcase carried more scratches than shine. Nothing about him suggested wealth. Yet his steady eyes revealed something far more valuable. Conviction. Ethan studied him through the glass wall before speaking. Send him in. The assistant quietly closed the door behind Lucas. For a few moments, neither man spoke. Charles Donovan remained seated, carefully observing the newcomer. Lucas broke the silence. Mr. Carter. Ethan. Lucas nodded. I know who you are. I'm guessing you know why I'm here. Ethan folded his arms. My assistant said you know something about Michael Mitchell. I do. And if we're going to have an honest conversation. Lucas glanced toward Charles. I'd like him to stay. Charles raised an eyebrow. You trust me? Lucas answered without hesitation. Michael Mitchell did. That single sentence filled the room with silence. Charles slowly sat back down. You knew Michael. Lucas placed his weathered briefcase on the conference table and carefully removed an old manila folder. I never met him, but I spent years trying to understand why he died. He slid several documents across the table. Their copies. The originals disappeared. Ethan immediately noticed newspaper clippings, financial records, and handwritten notes connected to events from 12 years earlier. Lucas pointed to a faded headline. Senior accountant dies in highway accident. That's how the newspapers reported it. He slid another document forward. But Michael Mitchell wasn't just an accountant. He was a forensic financial investigator. Ethan frowned. A forensic investigator. Lucas nodded. He specialized in tracing hidden money. Charles looked stunned. I never knew that. Almost no one did. Narrative memory quietly reached back through time. Years earlier, Michael Mitchell had accepted a position investigating financial irregularities for one of the country's largest investment conglomerates. The work suited his meticulous nature. He believed numbers told the truth when people refused to. What began as routine auditing gradually exposed a network of shell corporations, fraudulent acquisitions, and offshore accounts. At first, Michael assumed he had uncovered isolated crimes. Months later, He realized the fraud stretched across multiple industries and involved individuals powerful enough to influence investigations. Instead of reporting his findings immediately, he quietly gathered evidence piece by piece, understanding that accusations without proof would only make his family vulnerable. That cautious decision would later explain why his enemies never found everything they were searching for. Lucas continued. Michael was building a case. Against whom? Ethan asked. Lucas remained silent for a moment. Then he answered. Victor Blackwood. The name settled heavily inside the room. Charles slowly removed his glasses. I've heard that name. So have I, Ethan admitted. I received a strange phone call after the gala. Lucas looked directly at him. I know. Ethan's eyes narrowed. How? Because Victor always announces himself. He wants people to know they're already behind. Ethan leaned forward. Who exactly is Victor Blackwood? Lucas walked toward the window overlooking the city. He owns investment firms, shipping companies, technology funds, energy corporations, real estate trusts. He controls businesses in more than 30 countries. He donates millions to charity. He appears on magazine covers. People call him a visionary. Lucas turned. I call him something else. The most dangerous businessman I've ever investigated. Charles quietly asked. If he's so dangerous, why isn't he in prison? Lucas gave a bitter smile. I tried. Narrative exposition drifted into Lucas's past. 7 years earlier, Lucas had been one of the youngest investigators assigned to a federal financial crimes task force. Brilliant with forensic accounting and relentless in interviews, he earned a reputation for refusing shortcuts. During an 18-month investigation into Victor Blackwood's empire, Lucas uncovered patterns that mirrored the hidden transactions Michael Mitchell had once followed. Before arrest warrants could be prepared, crucial evidence disappeared from secure storage. Witnesses withdrew their statements. Anonymous complaints accused Lucas of misconduct. Offered a chance to save his career by signing a falsified report he refused. Within weeks, his badge was gone. His reputation collapsed, but one belief never changed. Victor Blackwood had not beaten justice. He had merely delayed it. Ethan slowly closed the folder. Why are you bringing this to me now? Lucas answered honestly. Because Grace Mitchell is in danger. At the mention of Grace's name, Ethan looked up immediately. What do you mean? Victor doesn't care about her. He cares about what her father left behind. Ethan's heartbeat quickened. The envelope. Lucas stared. You know about an envelope? Ethan hesitated. I've seen her protected. Lucas's expression grew serious. Then she's carrying exactly what Victor has been searching for. At that exact moment, several miles away, Grace finished her evening shift at Linda's cafe. Linda smiled warmly. Go home and get some rest. Grace thanked her and stepped outside. She never noticed the dark SUV parked across the street. Inside sat 2 men wearing business suits. One quietly lowered a pair of binoculars. She's leaving. The driver picked up a secure phone. Report. We have visual confirmation. Maintain distance. No contact. The caller ended the conversation. The passenger frowned. Why don't we just take the envelope? The driver shook his head. Orders from Mr. Blackwood. We follow. We don't touch. Grace walked through the evening crowd unaware that every turn she made was being documented. Inside Victor Blackwood's mountain estate, Victor entered a private gallery that displayed photographs from decades of business triumphs. One framed picture caught his attention. A much younger Victor stood beside several executives. One face had been deliberately scratched away. Michael Mitchell. Victor touched the damaged photograph. So stubborn. His voice carried no anger. Only disappointment. You could have lived a comfortable life. He turned toward his chief of security. Our observers. They're following Grace. And Ethan. Meeting with Lucas Reed. Victor smiled faintly. Excellent. The security chief looked confused. They're becoming allies. Victor nodded. Exactly. He walked toward a massive chessboard carved from black marble and ivory. Without hesitation, he sacrificed one of his own pieces. Sometimes, the fastest path to victory is allowing your opponents to believe they're finally seeing the whole board. Back in Ethan's office, Lucas reached into his briefcase one last time. I didn't come empty-handed. He placed an old photograph on the conference table. Ethan picked it up. The image showed Michael Mitchell standing beside another man outside a courthouse. The second man's face was unmistakable. Ethan's hands trembled. It was his own father. On the back of the photograph, written in Michael's handwriting, were 8 words. If anything happens to me, trust Daniel Carter. Ethan felt the room spin. His father had not merely known Michael Mitchell. They had been working together. And whatever they had uncovered, it had been important enough for one man to die, and another to spend the rest of his life searching for answers. Outside the skyscraper, neither Ethan nor Lucas noticed the black luxury sedan parked across the street. Behind its tinted window, a silver-haired man calmly watched the lights glowing in Ethan's office. Victor Blackwood smiled to himself. The game has finally begun. And for the first time in years, he welcomed the challenge. Night settled over the city, but none of the people now bound together by Michael Mitchell's long-buried secret found any rest. Inside the executive office of Carter Technologies, Ethan Carter remained standing beside the conference table, the old photograph still trembling in his hand. His late father, Daniel Carter, stood shoulder to shoulder with Michael Mitchell outside a federal courthouse. Neither man looked frightened. Instead, they wore the determined expressions of people who had made a difficult decision and intended to see it through. 8 handwritten words on the back of the photograph echoed through Ethan's mind. If anything happens to me, trust Daniel Carter. He looked up at Lucas Reed. My father never told me any of this. Lucas nodded. I don't think he was trying to keep you in the dark forever. What do you mean? He was buying time. Charles Donovan slowly removed another dusty ledger from one of the archive boxes. There was something your father used to say after Michael died. Ethan turned toward him. I'd almost forgotten. Charles opened the fragile notebook and found the page he had been searching for. He said, some truths become more dangerous after they're discovered than before. Silence settled over the room. For years, Ethan had believed his father's greatest battle had been building Carter Technologies. Now he realized the company itself might have survived only because 2 honest men had quietly stood against someone far more powerful. Lucas broke the silence. Victor Blackwood doesn't simply destroy businesses. He destroys people. He studies them. He learns what they love. Then he uses it against them. Ethan's jaw tightened. You've been chasing him for years. I have. And you've never found enough evidence. Lucas looked directly into Ethan's eyes. Not until now. Ethan frowned. You think Grace has it? Lucas didn't answer immediately. Instead, he carefully spread several copies of financial charts across the table. Narrative exposition drifted back 12 years. Michael Mitchell had never been reckless, Before copying evidence against Victor Blackwood, he had spent months creating duplicate trails, intentionally separating records so no single discovery would expose the entire truth. Some documents identified shell corporations, others traced illegal acquisitions. A final collection connected every transaction into one undeniable pattern. Michael knew that if all the evidence remained together, it could be destroyed in a single raid. Separating it increased the chance that at least one piece would survive. It also meant that whoever inherited his work would have to understand how the pieces fit together before exposing them. Lucas tapped the charts. Michael wasn't carrying one file. He was protecting a puzzle. Ethan studied the documents. So even if Victor gets one piece, he still can't bury the truth. Exactly. Charles looked thoughtful. Michael planned this. Lucas nodded. He knew someone would eventually come looking. Across town, Grace unlocked the door to her motel room and immediately sensed something was wrong. Nothing appeared stolen. Nothing was broken. Yet the room felt disturbed. Her father's old habit returned to her mind. When a place feels different, trust your instincts before your eyes. She quietly stepped inside. The blanket covering the bed had been folded differently. A coffee mug she distinctly remembered leaving beside the sink now rested near the window. Someone had entered. Carefully, she reached beneath the mattress. The hospital envelope remained there. Untouched. She released a slow breath. They were searching, but they didn't know where. Grace sat on the edge of the bed, her heartbeat refusing to slow. Then she noticed something else. A tiny black object attached beneath the wooden table. No larger than a coin. She crouched closer. A tracking beacon. Someone wanted to know where she went, not where she lived. Her pulse quickened. Without removing the device, she quietly picked up her backpack, left the envelope beneath the mattress and walked back outside. If someone was watching, she would give them exactly what they expected. Several blocks away, a black SUV immediately pulled away from the curb. The passenger smiled. She's moving. The driver nodded. Stay 2 cars behind. Neither man realized Grace had already seen them reflected in the cafe window before leaving. She deliberately took crowded streets, crossed busy intersections, and entered a large 24-hour grocery store. She wasn't trying to escape. She was confirming. Every time she exited one aisle, the same 2 men appeared moments later. Her father had once turned ordinary errands into lessons. He would occasionally ask her to notice the same stranger appearing in different places. When she finally spotted the pattern, he smiled proudly. Observation keeps honest people alive. At the time, she thought it was simply a game. Now she understood why he had taught it. Back at Carter Technologies, Ethan grabbed his car keys. I'm going to find Grace. Lucas stood. Not alone. You think she's already being watched? I know she is. Ethan looked surprised. How can you be sure? Lucas pointed toward the office window. Because Victor never waits. He already knows we're asking questions. Charles frowned. How? Lucas calmly replied. Power leaves footprints. People like Victor pay to know everything important before anyone else does. Ethan remembered the mysterious phone call after the gala. The caller hadn't sounded curious. He had sounded informed. Lucas continued. If Grace still has what Victor wants, tonight may be the safest she'll ever be again. The 3 men hurried toward the elevators. None of them noticed the maintenance worker mopping the hallway. As soon as the elevator doors closed, the janitor quietly removed a tiny earpiece hidden beneath his cap. He spoke softly. "They're leaving." The response came instantly. "Continue observation." The janitor nodded almost imperceptibly. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood." Miles away, Victor Blackwood stood in the library of his mountain estate, gazing at a framed portrait of himself receiving a humanitarian award. To the public, he represented success, generosity, and influence. Only a handful of people knew another side existed. His chief of security entered. "Our people report that Carter and Lucas Reed have joined forces." Victor smiled. "I expected they would. They're on their way to Grace." Victor walked toward the fireplace. "Good." The security chief hesitated. "Should we intercept them?" Victor shook his head. "No. They're finally moving the pieces exactly where I want them." He picked up an antique pocket watch that had belonged to his father. For years it had reminded him that patience often achieved what force never could. Then he quietly gave his next instruction. "Bring Noah Mitchell to the city." The security chief looked up. "You want him watched?" Victor's eyes became cold. "No. I want him found." Far across the city, inside a quiet university engineering laboratory, Noah Mitchell looked up from the prototype drone he had been building. He smiled as his phone vibrated with a message from Grace. "How are your classes going?" He quickly replied, "Good, I'll graduate soon. Dad would be proud." Grace smiled when she read the message, unaware that two men in dark suits had just entered the university campus and quietly asked the receptionist one simple question. "Can you tell us where to find Noah Mitchell?" The storm that Michael Mitchell had sacrificed his life trying to keep away from his children had finally reached both of them. And this time, it wasn't coming for hidden documents. It was coming for family. The city never slept. Traffic still flowed beneath glowing skyscrapers, restaurants welcomed late-night customers, and office towers shimmered against the dark sky. To everyone else, it was another ordinary evening. For Ethan Carter, it had become a race against time. His black sedan sped through downtown streets with Lucas Reed in the passenger seat. Charles Donovan followed behind in another vehicle, carrying every file they had recovered from Daniel Carter's archives. Neither man spoke for several minutes. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "If Victor has been watching Grace all these years, why wait until now?" Lucas kept his eyes on the road ahead. "Because she was invisible." Ethan glanced toward him. "What do you mean?" "People ignored her. They saw a maid. They never imagined she might be protecting something worth billions." Lucas paused before continuing. "But the moment the gala made headlines, Grace became visible. The humiliation forced everyone connected to her into the open." Ethan tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "So my mistake helped Victor?" Lucas didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence itself was enough. Across town, Grace exited the grocery store carrying only a small paper bag. She had intentionally left the hospital envelope hidden in the motel. If someone followed her tonight, they would find nothing. As she crossed the parking lot, she glanced into the reflection of a parked SUV. The same dark sedan remained 2 rows behind. The same driver. The same passenger. They hadn't even tried to hide anymore. Grace whispered to herself, "They're getting impatient." Instead of returning directly to the motel, she boarded a city bus crowded with evening commuters. The SUV followed. She transferred to another route. The SUV followed again. By the third transfer, there was no doubt. She was being watched. Narrative exposition reached gently into the past. Michael Mitchell had never believed courage meant confronting danger recklessly. He taught Grace that survival often depended on patience and observation. During weekend hikes through the forests surrounding their farmhouse, he would occasionally ask her to notice unfamiliar footprints or broken branches. "The woods always tell a story," he would say. "Most people panic when they're hunted. Don't panic. Think." Those lessons had seemed unnecessary to a teenager. Years later, they became the reason Grace recognized surveillance before it became an attack. Several miles away, Noah Mitchell packed books into his backpack after finishing an evening engineering project. His classmates waved goodbye. "See you Monday." "You too." He stepped outside the university laboratory, unaware that two men in tailored suits watched from across the street. One quietly spoke into an earpiece. "Target confirmed." The other nodded. "Maintain distance. No contact until instructed." Noah walked toward the student parking lot, humming softly to himself. He had no idea anyone knew his name. Back inside Victor Blackwood's mountain estate, Victor studied an antique world map hanging inside his private office. His chief of security entered. "Our observers have maintained visual contact with both Grace and Noah." Victor folded his hands behind his back. "And Ethan?" "Searching." Victor smiled faintly. He finally understands what it feels like to arrive too late. The security chief waited for further instructions. Victor walked toward a locked cabinet and removed an aged leather folder marked only with the initials MM. Inside rested photocopies of incomplete financial records. None of them connected. None of them were enough to prosecute anyone. Victor closed the folder. Michael was thorough. He never kept everything together. The security chief frowned. "So the missing evidence?" Victor nodded. "Still exists. And Grace either knows where it is, or unknowingly carries the final clue." He looked toward the city lights. "I've spent 12 years buying governments, acquiring companies, silencing witnesses. I'm not losing to a promise made by a dying father." Back on the highway, Lucas's phone vibrated. He answered immediately. "Read." A familiar voice spoke quickly. It finally happened. Lucas recognized the caller. Detective Maria Collins, one of the few honest officers who still trusted him. "What happened?" "Someone accessed the sealed Mitchell accident file tonight." Lucas's expression hardened. "Who?" "The request came through a judicial authorization. Signed less than an hour ago." Lucas frowned. "Can you trace it?" "I'm trying." But whoever requested it had very powerful clearance. Lucas thanked her and ended the call. Ethan looked over. "Bad news." "Worse. Victor is cleaning up old evidence." "Which means?" Lucas met Ethan's eyes. "He knows we're getting closer." Meanwhile, Grace quietly returned to the motel, using the rear entrance instead of the front lobby. She climbed the stairs without making unnecessary noise. The hallway remained empty. Too empty. She unlocked her room and immediately stopped. The bed had been moved. Only by a few inches. But enough. Someone had entered again. This time they hadn't bothered hiding it. Grace closed the door behind her. Instead of running to check the envelope, she walked calmly toward the bathroom. The mirror reflected the entire room behind her. Nothing moved. No one remained inside. She reached beneath the sink and removed a small metal tin containing several family photographs. Beneath them lay a tiny brass key. Another gift from her father. Narrative memory unfolded quietly. A week before Michael Mitchell's fatal crash, he had taken Grace to an abandoned barn standing near the edge of their farmland. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard rested a small, locked box. Michael had shown her the brass key but deliberately locked the box again without revealing its contents. "One day," he had told her, "you'll understand why some doors should only be opened when there's no other choice." After his death, Grace returned to the barn. The box was gone. Only the key remained hidden where her father had instructed. She had carried it ever since, believing it might someday matter. Until now, she had never spoken of it to anyone. Grace stared at the tiny key resting in her palm. If they're looking for Dad's secret, maybe this isn't over. A loud knock suddenly echoed through the motel room. 3 firm knocks. Then silence. Grace's heartbeat accelerated. "Who is it?" A familiar voice answered. "It's Ethan." She froze. Another voice followed. "And Lucas Reed." Grace had never heard the second name before. She slowly opened the door. Ethan stood there looking exhausted. The confidence that had once defined him had been replaced by unmistakable regret. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Ethan looked into her tear-filled eyes. "I'm not here to defend what I did." Grace remained silent. "I'm here because I finally know. I should have listened." Before Grace could answer, Lucas stepped forward. "We don't have much time." Grace looked at him cautiously. "Who are you?" "My name is Lucas Reed. I've been trying to solve your father's murder for 7 years." Those words struck Grace harder than anything Ethan had said. "My father's..." She struggled to breathe. "They told us it was an accident." Lucas slowly shook his head. "I don't believe it ever was." Grace's world seemed to stop. Behind them, unnoticed by everyone inside the room, a dark SUV rolled quietly into the motel parking lot. 2 men stepped out. One spoke into a hidden microphone. "Visual confirmation. Carter, Reed, and Grace are finally together." Far above the city, Victor Blackwood listened to the report without changing expression. He calmly closed his eyes. Then, almost gently, he gave the order that would change every life connected to Michael Mitchell forever. "Bring me Noah Mitchell." The line went silent. Victor opened his eyes. "The next move belongs to me. Thank you for following the story. If you'd like to stay with Ethan, Grace, and Lucas as the mystery deepens, consider subscribing to the channel as we continue toward 500 subscribers. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The next chapter will test every promise Michael Mitchell left behind. Grace's fingers tightened around the small brass key until its edges pressed painfully into her palm. For years, she had believed the key was nothing more than the last keepsake her father had entrusted to her. Now, after hearing Lucas Reed calmly state that Michael Mitchell had likely been murdered, every memory she had buried resurfaced with frightening clarity. The motel room felt smaller, the air heavier. Ethan noticed the color drain from her face. "Grace," she slowly raised a trembling hand. "Please don't say anything yet." She walked to the only chair in the room and sat down carefully, as though her legs no longer trusted her. Lucas remained standing near the window, instinctively checking the parking lot through a narrow gap in the curtain. "We don't have long." Grace looked at him. "You said my father was murdered." "I believe so." "Believe?" Lucas nodded. "I won't call it a fact until I can prove it." He removed a weathered notebook from his briefcase. "When I investigated Victor Blackwood years ago, I kept finding references to a financial investigator who disappeared just before a major federal inquiry." He opened the notebook. That investigator was Michael Mitchell. Grace lowered her head. "My father never told us what he really did." "He wouldn't have." Lucas's voice softened. The fewer people who knew, the safer his family would be. Narrative memory drifted back to Michael's final week alive. He had become quieter, often checking the farmhouse windows before locking the doors each evening. Grace had noticed unfamiliar cars driving slowly past their property more than once. Michael never spoke about them, but he quietly changed routines, taught Noah how to recognize emergency exits, and insisted Grace memorize important phone numbers instead of writing them down. At the time, his family believed he had become overly cautious after exposing corporate fraud. In reality, he had already realized someone was watching them. Grace suddenly remembered something. The week before Dad died, he made Noah and me practice leaving the house through the back door. Lucas nodded slowly. That's exactly what I expected. Ethan listened silently. Every new revelation deepened his guilt. Grace had carried these memories alone, while he had believed the worst about her. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Grace looked toward him. I know those words don't fix anything. They don't. I judged you. Yes. I humiliated you. Yes. I failed you. Grace held his gaze. For the Bobbies, I hope you become the father they deserve. The words were neither cruel nor forgiving. They were honest. Ethan accepted them without argument. I'll spend the rest of my life trying. Lucas cleared his throat. We have another problem. He pulled the curtain aside, just enough to reveal the parking lot. The SUV. Grace immediately recognized it. They've followed me since yesterday. Ethan stepped beside Lucas. Two well-dressed men remained inside the vehicle. Neither appeared impatient. Neither looked away from the motel. They're professionals, Lucas murmured. They're waiting for instructions. Across town, Noah Mitchell walked toward his apartment carrying textbooks beneath one arm. His phone vibrated. A message from Grace. I'll call you tomorrow, stay safe. He smiled and replied with a thumbs-up emoji before slipping the phone back into his pocket. He never noticed the delivery van parked half a block away. Inside sat the same two men who had visited the university. One quietly spoke into an encrypted radio. Target is alone. The reply came almost instantly. Continue observation. No action until confirmation. Back at Victor Blackwood's estate, the billionaire stood in a private art gallery lined with priceless paintings collected over decades. To visitors, the gallery reflected culture and refinement. Hidden behind one painting, however, was a reinforced vault. Victor unlocked it using both a fingerprint and a steel key. Inside rested dozens of confidential files. Government officials, corporate executives, judges, business rivals. Each folder represented leverage accumulated over a lifetime. He opened one labeled MITCHLL. Inside lay only a handful of incomplete documents. Victor frowned. 12 years. And still incomplete. His chief of security entered. Our observers confirm Carter and Lucas Reed are with Grace. Victor closed the file. As expected. They may move her. They should. Victor walked toward the window. A frightened opponent makes mistakes. The security chief hesitated. What if Grace truly doesn't know where the evidence is? Victor looked at him without emotion. Then someone she loves will remember for her. The implication chilled even the seasoned security chief. Victor rarely raised his voice. He rarely threatened. His calmness was what made him terrifying. Back inside the motel, Lucas spread a city map across the small table. We can't stay here. Grace nodded. I know. Ethan looked between them. My guest house. Lucas shook his head. Victor will expect that. My corporate penthouse. Too obvious. Grace quietly spoke. I know somewhere. Both men turned toward her. My father's old farmhouse. Ethan looked surprised. I thought it was sold. It was. Grace reached into her backpack and removed the brass key. But there was an old equipment shed behind the property. My father never told anyone about it. Narrative exposition returned to the final lesson Michael had shared with Grace. On a quiet autumn afternoon, only days before his fatal crash, Michael had walked with Grace beyond the orchard to a weathered wooden shed almost hidden by overgrown trees. Beneath loose floorboards he revealed a rusted metal lock, then placed the small brass key into her hand. He did not show her what the lock protected. Instead, he simply said, "Some secrets aren't meant to stay buried forever. They're meant to survive until the right people are ready to uncover them." Grace had never understood those words. Now they echoed with startling clarity. Lucas looked at the key. I think your father left us our next lead. Ethan took a slow breath. Then we leave tonight. Grace nodded. Before they realized we're gone. Outside, the SUV's driver lowered his binoculars. They're packing. The passenger picked up the radio. Sir, I believe the target is preparing to relocate. Far above the city, Victor Blackwood listened without visible concern. Instead, a faint smile crossed his face. Good. He placed the Mitchell file back inside the vault. They're finally walking toward the place Michael always intended. His security chief frowned. You knew about the farmhouse. Victor answered quietly. I've known about it for 12 years. Then why haven't we searched it? Victor's eyes remained fixed on the dark skyline. Because Michael Mitchell was too intelligent to hide the truth where impatient men would look first. He turned toward his chief of security. Now, follow them. But whatever happens, do not let Noah Mitchell out of your sight. As the order was carried out, none of them realized that Noah had already noticed the same delivery van parked outside his apartment for the second night in a row. Unlike the day before, he didn't dismiss it. He remembered his father's old advice. If someone appears once, it's coincidence. Twice, pay attention. 3 times, run. For the first time in years, Noah felt a quiet, unexplainable fear settle into his chest. Somewhere, a storm his father had died trying to stop was finally reaching him. The highway leading out of the city was nearly empty. Ethan Carter drove the lead vehicle while Lucas Reed sat beside him, studying every mirror and every passing car. Grace rode in the back seat, the small brass key hidden inside her jacket pocket. Behind them, Charles Donovan followed at a careful distance, carrying Daniel Carter's notebooks and the files recovered from Carter Technologies. No one spoke for several miles. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy with anticipation. Grace stared through the window as familiar landscapes slowly emerged from the darkness. Rolling fields replaced towering buildings. Old fences lined the road. Weathered barns stood like forgotten monuments to simpler days. Every mile brought her closer to the place she once called home. Narrative exposition carried her back to childhood. The Mitchell farmhouse had never been luxurious. The roof leaked during heavy storms. The porch creaked with every step. Winters were difficult and summers demanded endless work in the fields. Yet Grace and Noah had never felt poor. Michael Mitchell measured wealth differently. Family dinners, honest work, laughter around the fireplace, and helping neighbors without expecting anything in return were treasures no bank could hold. Those values became the foundation of Grace's character, long before tragedy reshaped her life. Ethan glanced into the rearview mirror. You okay? Grace nodded faintly. I haven't been back since the funeral. I'm sorry. She looked at him. So am I. Ethan understood what she meant. She wasn't apologizing for the past. She was mourning the years both of them had unknowingly lost. Lucas suddenly looked toward the side mirror. We've got company. A black SUV had appeared nearly half a mile behind them, maintaining perfect distance, never overtaking, never falling back. Ethan's expression hardened. The same one. Grace nodded. They've been following me for days. Lucas calmly reached into his briefcase and removed a small GPS jammer. I hoped I wouldn't need this. He activated the device. The SUV remained behind them. Lucas frowned. They're tracking us visually. They're good. Back at Victor Blackwood's estate, a digital map displayed the movement of several vehicles across the county. One signal abruptly disappeared. The security chief looked up. We've lost one tracker. Victor didn't appear surprised. Lucas read. He finally remembered his training. The chief hesitated. We no longer know their destination. Victor walked to a large antique globe and slowly spun it. We don't need to. They're going exactly where Michael wanted them to go. His confidence unsettled everyone in the room. Hours later, Ethan turned onto a narrow country road bordered by towering oak trees. Grace's breathing slowed. I remember this road. The farmhouse soon appeared in the distance. Time had not been kind. Broken shutters hung loosely from cracked walls. Tall weeds swallowed the front yard. The porch sagged. Nature had slowly reclaimed what grief had abandoned. Grace stepped out first. For a long moment, she simply stood there. Memories flooded back. Her father repairing fences. Noah chasing butterflies across the yard. Her mother singing while hanging laundry in the afternoon sun. She quietly wiped away a tear. It still feels like home. Ethan didn't interrupt. Some grief deserved silence. Lucas walked slowly around the property. Nothing appeared disturbed. Yet his instincts refused to relax. Stay together. Charles unlocked the front door, using an old spare key Grace had kept for sentimental reasons. Dust filled the air as they entered. Furniture remained covered with faded sheets. Family photographs still decorated the fireplace. Grace picked up one picture. Michael stood smiling between Grace and Noah. She gently brushed years of dust from the glass. I miss you, Dad. Her voice barely carried across the room. Narrative exposition reached back to Michael's final evening at home. He had lingered longer than usual after dinner, watching Grace and Noah laugh over a board game. His smile carried a quiet sadness neither child recognized. Before everyone went to bed, he embraced them both more tightly than ever before. He already suspected that dangerous people were closing in, but he refused to let fear become the final memory his children carried. Instead, he chose love. That final embrace became the emotional anchor Grace unknowingly carried through every hardship that followed. Lucas entered from the back hallway. The equipment shed is still standing. Grace instinctively reached for the brass key. Then let's go. They crossed the overgrown backyard under the pale light of the moon. Hidden behind old apple trees stood the weathered wooden shed. Its faded paint had almost disappeared. One rusted padlock remained attached to the door. Grace inserted the brass key. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, click. The lock opened. She slowly pushed the door inward. The shed looked ordinary. Old tools, broken farming equipment, dust-covered shelves. Ethan frowned. Are we missing something? Grace remembered her father's voice. The woods always tell a story. She looked carefully around the floor. Near the back wall, one plank appeared newer than the others. Lucas noticed it too. There. Together, Ethan and Lucas lifted the heavy wooden plank. Beneath it rested a small steel box, protected by another lock. Grace inserted the brass key once more. This time it opened immediately. Inside lay several waterproof envelopes, a leather-bound journal, an old USB flash drive, and a sealed letter addressed in Michael Mitchell's unmistakable handwriting. To Grace and Noah. Grace's hands trembled. She slowly broke the seal. The first lines blurred through her tears. If you are reading this, it means I failed to come home. I prayed this day would never arrive. No one spoke. Grace continued reading. Everything I did to protect you. The people responsible are more powerful than you can imagine. Trust no title, no wealth, and no public reputation. Judge people only by what they do when no one is watching. Ethan lowered his eyes. Those words pierced him more deeply than Grace could ever know. Michael's letter continued. If Daniel Carter is alive, trust him. If he is gone, trust his son only after he earns it. Grace slowly looked at Ethan. Neither of them needed to say anything. He understood. Trust wasn't something he could ask for anymore. It was something he would have to prove. Lucas carefully examined the USB drive. This may contain everything. Before anyone could speak again, a distant engine echoed through the quiet countryside. Then another, and another. Lucas moved to the shed doorway. 3 black SUVs were turning onto the farm road. Headlights cut through the darkness. Ethan stepped beside him. They found us. Lucas's face became grim. No. They were waiting for us to find the evidence. Far away, inside Victor Blackwood's private study, the billionaire calmly watched live drone footage of the Mitchell farm displayed across an enormous monitor. For the first time in 12 years, the final missing piece had surfaced. Victor smiled. Thank you, Michael. You finally led me to it. He turned toward his chief of security. Recover the evidence. The chief nodded. And Carter. Victor's smile disappeared. Alive. What about Grace? Victor remained silent for several seconds. When he finally answered, his voice was colder than anyone in the room had ever heard. She has become too important to kill. From this moment forward, Grace Mitchell belongs to me. As the SUVs surrounded the abandoned farmhouse and Lucas quietly loaded his pistol, not to seek revenge, but to buy time for the others to escape, Grace clutched her father's journal tightly against her chest. She realized something horrifying. Finding the truth had not ended the nightmare. It had only opened the first door. Somewhere beyond the darkness, an even greater war was waiting. And neither she nor Ethan knew that another powerful force, one that had been silently watching Victor Blackwood himself, was about to enter their lives, setting the stage for a far more dangerous battle in Part 3. Thank you for joining us through Part 2. If you enjoyed the story and want to see what happens when the mystery grows even bigger in Part 3, consider subscribing as we continue toward 500 subscribers. We'd also love to know where you're watching from, so leave a comment below. Part 3 will reveal a new player whose arrival changes the conflict forever.